Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fifth session of the TWU Bold Leadership Speaker Series, where we have been discussing issues common to women who aspire to be leaders in the C-suite and on corporate boards. Welcome to TWU College of Business, which is one of the sponsors of this event tonight, and also the Jane Nelson Institute for Women's Leadership. Both of these organizations within TWU have a mission to advance women in leadership, and also the TWU College of Business has a particular focus on healthcare administrations in its undergraduate and graduate programs. I am Dr. Dewana Horn, and I am Associate Dean in the College of Business. I focus on accreditation. I'm currently leading our college through another accrediting agency, AACSB, and I'm also the Associate Professor of Management in the College of Business. I'm located in Houston. We have our programs in Houston, Dallas, and Denton for TWU's College of Business. We offer graduate programs in business. We have the MBA with several areas of emphasis. We have accounting, human resource management, healthcare administration, women in leadership, sports medicine, data analytics, and marketing as concentrations. Oh, and last but not least, did I say women in leadership? Okay. We also have our undergraduate programs in all of the general business disciplines, and we have an undergraduate programs and graduate programs in healthcare administration. So please check out our website to find out more about our programs if you're interested in attending our programs. Tonight, we are going to talk about women on corporate board. The title of our session is Women on Board. And this is a very, very important topic because the number of women represented on corporate boards is very low. At this point in our society and in the workforce, women outnumber males in the workforce, and also women are getting educated with college degrees, graduate and undergraduate, at a rate that's more than males. Yet, only 8.2 of our Fortune 500 companies have women on corporate boards. And then of that number, less than 1% of those women on corporate boards are minorities. So tonight we have a success story, and we have a person who was just recently appointed to a public corporate board of CenterPoint Energy, and her name is Raquel Lewis. Right now, I'm going to introduce Raquel Lewis. All right, so hi, Raquel. She's on mute, okay. Okay, so Raquel Lewis was recently appointed to the board of directors of CenterPoint Energy, which is an amazing accomplishment, and we congratulate her for that. But leading up to that point, Raquel has been a very strategic and effective communications professional, especially in the transportation industry, where she's made her mark there. Right now, she currently serves as the Director of Communications and Public Information for the Texas Department of Transportation. And in that role, she has done several other positions, but in that role, she has been innovative, she has been engaging, and she has been very impactful. So she has been innovative to develop strategies to communicate across several stakeholders in order for the company and in society at large to make a very big mark in the transportation industry. She garners public engagement and acceptance for her initiatives among diverse populations and constituents. And she is very, very impactful to gain acceptance. And that acceptance of whatever she's trying to communicate has been impactful to impact legislative wins for major transportation projects. Now, I live in Houston and she lives in Houston. And we know that in Houston, traffic is like one of the reasons why people may decide not to move here is because of traffic. But because of Raquel, we have had major advances through legislation and through different projects that she's behind these initiatives in order to move us forward in that area. So I welcome Raquel Lewis to the stage and to this session. And hopefully we're going to learn so much more about her than her bio. All right. Thank you, Raquel, for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Horn, for having me, and welcome to all of our participants. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. And then we have our moderator who is going to lead this conversation to give us insight into Raquel's experience. We have Marie Gillo. Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Marie. Thank you for coming. Okay, so Marie has been in executive search since 2007, and she quickly got a hold of all of the knowledge in that area and started her own company, Abaco, in 2008. And Marie has a passion for uplifting and assigning and searching for women to be in these corporate positions, in these corporate roles. So she has made over 500 assignments in C-suite positions and corporate board positions and positions in the upper echelons of companies. She has a passion for helping women to grow and to reach their dreams within the workforce. I met her through an initiative through the Greater Houston Women's Chamber of Commerce called Women on Board, where she gathers about 15 women each year. I was in the first cohort, but she gathers about 15 women each year who aspire to be on corporate boards, and she provides just enormous amount of information to these women and connects them to networks that could make that happen, and also connects these women to each other so that they could be in contact and networking with each other as thought leaders towards this important goal. So I welcome both Marie and Raquel, and I am going to lead the stage and let them talk about this very important topic. So ladies, I will be back at about 15 minutes to the hour. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dewana.
Thank you.
So, well, welcome everybody, and we are so excited. I know Raquel and I are both excited to be here and visit with you and share some insights that could be helpful or hopefully inspiring to those of you out there in the audience that might be considering at some point in your career being on a public or private company board. And I must say, I was very delighted to get to meet Raquel Lewis to do this program, because she is just a rock star in her own field. And I have a passion for seeing executive women succeed. And she is absolutely a success. And she's definitely a role model for all of us, and someone to aspire to be. So in meeting Raquel, as Dr. Horn mentioned, she's the public information officer for TxDOT, for the Texas Department of Transportation. And she has been responsible for enormous capital projects that have to do with traffic, and traffic affects all of our lives every day in Houston. No matter what you do, you're impacted by that. And she is the public spokesperson who faces the media, the businesses, the people who are impacted by any changes in transportation. As we know, it's painful sometimes to get there through the process, but once it's all built, it's great. But she's the person who has to be on the hot seat and speak to these companies. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how she got into that role. And then she was just recently appointed, and this is a big deal. In September of this year, she was appointed to the CenterPoint Energy board of directors. And that is a big step, especially for your first board appointment. And something I can share working with women who get on boards is that very first one is the hardest one to get on. And so I've assured her that her phone's probably going to ring off the wall now that she's on that board. But let's get to into our discussion. And Raquel, welcome. And it's my pleasure to work with you on this. And I would love it if you could share with the audience, just first of all, as a basis, how you got started with TxDOT and kind of how your career has progressed to where you are now.
Absolutely. I'm going to take a little point of privilege and say, transportation is so much more than traffic.
Well,
so I know that everybody thinks traffic when they think about transportation, but transportation affects our lives almost every day. It's how you get to where you work, play, where your children are, how they get to school, how they get from school. It's how we sustain a big component of our everyday lives. And while traffic is certainly certainly in Houston, an inherent part of what we deal with, it's important that people recognize that it is an essential stable element of how our economy survives, the ability for us to stay vital, quality of life contributing. And so you only have traffic where you have thriving areas, that there's something in the places where people want to be and you've got a congregation. So traffic is actually a healthy indicator of our success in the Houston area. But it is, there's no doubt that there's pain involved, but we encourage people to do planning and we encourage people to make good decisions so that they don't always have to be in the depth of the traffic that we have. But it's a lot of people here and there are more coming. So we've got to make wise decisions on how we move forward with the transportation solutions. So I just took that as a quick little point of privilege and help people to kind of reframe their thoughts about transportation, because it is really important and vital to our sustainability. I have been in the transportation industry for more than 25 years now. Shortly after I graduated from UT, I started working at Texas Southern University. And my first job out of college at Texas Southern was actually cancer prevention. I did cancer education and went out in the community. That's kind of where I started getting my feel and growing my my oats, if you will, in grassroots and community engagement and community involvement, and the importance of having liaisons for at-risk populations. And I segued from there to working in the Center for Transportation at Texas Southern University. And I was a research associate initially and progressed in my responsibilities with the Transportation Research Center to being director of our marketing and technology transfer. I also was responsible for student scholarships. And, I say all of that to say that all of those things really kind of build the seeds in the ground for the blooms that are coming out, in 25 years of my career. So happened it wound up being transportation. It wound up being a really fertile ground for me. And but what I do is deal with people and deal with relationships and interface with the decision influencers, makers, and those who are impacted by decisions on a daily basis. That's a big part of what I do in the transportation industry. And when I was at Texas Southern and I was responsible for recruiting students into the master's program and into the transportation studies program, what I could tell people is you could do anything in the world that you want to do within transportation, because it's a world of its own. And so that's still a reality that holds true today. And it's part of how and why I've had success in a very male majority-centric environment. And it's about having a passion for what you do and doing it to the best of your ability and making the best of every opportunity that's in front of you. I was recruited by a consulting firm shortly after a focus group meeting that they came to the Center for Transportation, and they wanted to get some feedback on preparing for a public meeting. And anybody who knows me will tell you that she's always got 2 cents on just about anything, but if you ask her, she can come up with a good 25 cents. So they asked what I thought about the materials that they were preparing for the public, and I didn't have any reason to not tell them exactly what I thought, and I thought they needed to change a lot. And so they asked me to come work with them to help fix their program. And that's how I got recruited to work for what was then recognized as Parsons Brinckerhoff, which was one of the top 10 engineering and consulting firms in the nation. And I enjoyed just under 10 years there with Parsons Brinckerhoff before I was recruited to come work for the local district of the Texas Department of Transportation. And I have been with TxDOT and serving in the capacity of being a liaison for the public for the Houston district and now for the Southeast region for now going on 14 years.
Wow. That's quite a great story. You mentioned about kind of coming up through the ranks. You've obviously, started straight out of school and started off, moved up from some entry level into positions of greater and greater authority and responsibility. Tell me a little bit about what that was like. Or are there, in the transportation industry, are there a majority of women, or did you find yourself on a team of mostly men, or what was the mix like?
It is certainly not a majority women. For most of my career, I have been the only, if not one of a few women in the room where the decisions were being made that I was participating in for one reason or another. And if I wasn't the only and one of a few, then I was probably, and let me say, did I say only women? And if that wasn't the case, then I was probably the only African American. Mm-hmm. And for much of my career, I was also the youngest person in the room. So I had all of those things. Hopefully nobody spent the time to count up all of those years, but I kind of moved into a new category now. So now I'm not so much the youngest in the room in transportation anymore, but there is still, it's still very frequent that it may be, me and only less than a handful of other women in the room and other women of color. So that has been pretty much the staple that I have operated in for most of my career.
Great. Well, and so certainly some challenges if you see it that way, but everybody goes through their path and their challenges. But when we spoke the other day, we talked about kind of the path that you've been on. You're in this role, and now you've been elected to this really major board. I mean, that's most people who start in board service sometimes start with some things a little bit smaller. And you kind of shared with me a little bit about a mentor that you've had. And I'm really interested in hearing about and having you share with the audience about how did that come about? And, what's your mentor like? And how has this mentor been able to help you? What impact has that had?
So fortunately, I have, for the majority of my life, had very strong, competent and influential adults around me as I was growing up, and had access to some very progressive African Americans throughout life. And so in many cases, that's who I was able to tap when I needed to have some understanding about the world in which I was trying to enter. whether that was work, whether it was school, whether it was, college, being able to have resources that you can tap to get real life experiences is absolutely key, which is also why I am such an advocate for mentorship and being available and being a resource, because so often we only know what we are exposed to. And so unless we are willing to allow others to be exposed to what we know, that creates a barrier. So I try to help open those doors. My mentor specifically in this case was a gentleman that I've known for a good portion of my life, and he's always made himself available in terms of being a resource, being an advocate. And he is a very successful C-suite person, and has served on boards for more than 20 years. And I am a 2010 graduate of Leadership Texas, which is a Texas-wide program for leadership that's run by the Women's Foundation. And one of the things that was cultivated in us as alumni in the Leadership Texas program was the importance of women leaders in serving on boards and serving in capacities for, public leadership, as well as corporate and corporate sponsorship. And that resonated with me. And along with the toolbox that was provided to us as alumni of the Leadership Texas program, they encouraged us to reach out to those that we know that are serving in corporate board service, and see if you can make contact and have some conversations, and if that can lead to an opportunity for mentorship. And in this case, it did. And what we will talk absolutely is that there is no prescription, there's no recipe for how to get on a board, but it is something that you likely will have to have some interest and passion for, and understand what it is you would bring to the benefit of board service. You got to know what impact you can offer in order to be attractive for board members to be interested in nominating you to participate. And so understanding that was important, and that there is a preparation, a game plan that you ought to have if this is something that you're interested in doing, and making and building the relationships that can afford you an opportunity. It's preparation meeting opportunity, and you don't really know when and how it's going to happen, but it is something that does require a plan and some preparation.
Well, I thought what was intriguing in your story is, and you're right, there are many, many paths to getting on a board. And some of the program that I work with the Greater Houston Women's Chamber, the Women on Board Institute that Dr. Horn mentioned, everybody wants to know, well, how do I do it? Or how did they do it? And how do I go get on a board? And so everybody's got their own unique story. In your case, I thought it was interesting that given the position that you're in with TxDOT, and that you had attended some other leadership programs and some things that inspired you, got you interested in board service. But it doesn't just happen just because you thought about it at one point. You actually had to make some effort. And I thought it was really intriguing that with your path, talk a little bit about your mentor and the role that played in you having this opportunity with CenterPoint Energy, because like you said, it's not luck. It's planning and careful planning and some opportunity and some things like that. But talk a little bit about your mentor, how you found him, and how that kind of transpired into you having this opportunity on the CenterPoint board.
So as I mentioned, he was someone that I've known most of my life. He's a family friend, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you have immediate access to people, but I was able to demonstrate that I had an interest, and I brought some skills to the table that I thought could be considered of value, and asked for some direction on, how do I make an entree into corporate board service? And he counseled me on, you know, making sure that I understood and studied business acumen, making sure that, I paid attention to Wall Street Journal and understood corporate governance, and, encouraged me on, a number of resources that I needed to make sure that I was prepared for and able to have an intelligent conversation, to be able to be a contributor to the kinds of things that are going to be important when a board recruiter or a potential board member is inquiring about why I'm interested in being on a board and what I thought I had to offer. And so we spent, I would say, probably the greater portion of 5 years having those kinds of conversations, and him depositing with me the kinds of things that were going to be important for me to understand and know, in building relationships with people who are in a position to make a recommendation when a board vacancy comes available. And Marie, you can speak to the importance of having board recruiters, and that being an option for how board seats are filled. But as often as corporate companies utilize recruiters, they also lean on the knowledge and referral of who they know. And when a board vacancy comes available, a lot of times a first option is to resource those who are on the board for who they might recommend for what the composition of that board is presently lacking, or is looking for how they want to augment the culture of the board for the direction of the company. And I was very fortunate that the person that had been helping me to cultivate myself to be ready felt like I was an ideal candidate when he made some decisions to leave Centerpoint. So that's, a direct result of being in the right place at the right time and knowing the right people. But I will also tell you, as true as the adage is not just what you know, it's who you know. But at the same time, you got to know what you need to know when it's time. And being prepared and being astute and being strategic about where and in what way you can add value to a board and a board's composition is key to that. And so while he was certainly instrumental in making the recommendation, I still had to go through all of the vetting, and I still had to prove where there was some value for Centerpoint in considering me as a candidate. And fortunately, they decided that I was an ideal candidate and invited me to participate as a board member.
Wow. Well, it is a great story, and there's a lot of key things in there in your story and what you shared with us about your own path to the board. And there's so many different, I've heard so many different paths into a board. So there's not one cookie cutter way to get on a board. There's not one right way to do it. Your exact steps may not work for somebody else, but in your case, you have a couple of things as we share with our women who aspire to be on boards about getting out of your circle, networking, getting to know people who serve on boards. That was one of the pieces of advice that your mentor gave to you. And so, when the thought occurred to you to possibly be on a board, it was years in the making of researching and planning and training and things like, taking additional business acumen courses or additional business courses, understanding financials, looking at of what you might offer on the board, preparing for that interview, all of the vetting that goes with being on a board. And there was opportunity because your mentor was on that board and rolled off and recommended you. But for our audience, as people may not realize, when there's not always a board vacancy. They don't rotate board members every year. So there's, especially with a big public company like CenterPoint. So if there's an opportunity on a board, they know when a vacancy is coming up. Typically, sometimes it's an age limit or a term limit, or maybe somebody is rolling off, but people don't just pop on and off of a board. So when there is a vacancy coming up, typically what happens is within the board, they ask the other board members if they have any recommendations for that position. And if you can consider that somebody serving on a board, it's a very serious matter, particularly with a public company. And so if somebody is going to make a recommendation, they're going to be very certain about who they are advocating for. And so for anybody aspiring to be on a board, somebody will have to advocate for you. In your case, it was somebody that was a mentor and a friend. But just because you have that relationship with somebody does not mean that because they think you're the coolest person on the planet, they're going to recommend you for the board. They have to make sure that you're qualified, you're going to do a good job, you're prepared for it and all of that, because their name and reputation is on the line. So finding someone to advocate for you, there are executive recruiters like myself, but typically when we're brought in to do a search, we're expected to find people who have already served on a board or already served on a particular committee chair and have a lot of experience. A lot of times our candidates are not people who've never served on a board. In that case, that first appointment, like I said, is so important and so key. After that, you probably will have recruiters call you. But on that first one, somebody's got to be your advocate. And that, in your case, this is just a great story. But also, another thing is getting yourself out there where people know who you are. If you just think it in your head, I want to serve on a board, and you tell like 3 people, chances are that's not going to be a big enough circle for somebody to think of you when they are going to advocate for somebody on a board. So some of what I was impressed with Raquel's background, a lot of times I encourage people to try to go speak at conferences or get themselves out there as a subject matter expert or get in articles or different things like that. But given her role as an outside public spokesperson for TxDOT, she's already very public figure and already very well known, but still there's a lot of stars that have to align to get on a board. And yet, companies, we're happy that companies are looking more seriously at the makeup of their boards. They're trying to bring in more diverse thought, which is more diversity in backgrounds of people that they bring in, different areas of expertise, sometimes different industries. And plays into that. They're trying to bring more women in on board, so they're tracking that. But it's really about the diversity of what somebody has to bring and offer. So one of my questions for you that we had talked about a little bit was, so you've been in the transportation industry and you've gotten elected to a public company board in a public utilities company. So how, what were the transferable skills that make it, that made you an attractive candidate for them?
Well, when we were having conversations about CenterPoint, and of course, as you would expect, when they were looking at me, they were looking at several other candidates and making a decision about who they wanted to bring forward with their nominating committee and recommending for selection. We discovered collectively that there is a natural synergy and a dovetail of the reality of transportation infrastructure and energy infrastructure. And, CenterPoint's business is the delivery of energy across the spectrum of the infrastructure that provides that energy. And at the core, what I do in terms of transportation and what CenterPoint does in terms of energy are fundamentally the same. We're getting to people what they need to support their daily lives, where they need to have it. and the importance of that and the importance of that infrastructure and the understanding of what it takes to have a critically sufficient and efficient way in which to deliver those services. So we were able to kind of identify that there was some natural synergy there in how the elements of what people depend on in terms of their daily life functionings are in both cases, very high in understanding that and understanding what impact that has on people's lives, their quality of life, their development, their community, the decisions that they make on a daily basis, and having the ability to appreciate that many of the same people that have responsibility for decision making and in the political and the community sphere have an interest in understanding and being able to clearly understand the approach and the plans that affect those things equally. And so there's lots of overlap with the people that I deal with on a very regular basis in transportation that the Centerpoint industry is responsible for dealing with as well. So we found a lot of natural synergy in what I do in transportation and what Centerpoint is responsible for in terms of energy transmission.
Well, and that's a really interesting point because there's a lot of people I talk to think, well, I couldn't be on a board because I haven't been the CEO or the CFO, or I haven't been in charge of operations for a big public company or something like that. And those are things that, are some traditional reasons why people get on a board. Those are some traditional experience, but it's not always the case, and especially now. So a lot of times it's certain subject matter expertise, or they see something that's a transferable skill or something that applies to their industry. In your case, having the contacts and the engagement that you've had within the city officials, with the public, with the people who are impacted by the changes in transportation or the impact of transportation on their daily lives. Energy, our source of energy, is also a big impact on our quality of life every day, and an impact to really the whole community, much like transportation is. And so, with that, I think they saw skills that you had with addressing the public, the messaging to the public, the access to the city officials, the understanding of delivering on something that impacts daily lives of the community. And that might not be what most people would have thought would have been the criteria to get on a board. So it's unique, but it's also what worked and what fit for them. And I know you went through a selection process and competed with other candidates for the role. So tell us, on the Centerpoint board, what is the mix of women and people of color on the board? Did they have a pretty good diversity mix on their board?
Well, I'm excited to be able to tell you that I am the first African-American woman selected to be on Centerpoint's board. That was also part of the legacy that the former chairman had an interest in being a contributor to that as part of his legacy. So that helped to identify me as an ideal candidate as well. But we're fortunate that Centerpoint and the leadership at Centerpoint recognizes and appreciates the importance of diversity and inclusion. The board reflects that. We have 3 women on the board, and there are 3 African Americans on the board, and there are currently 3 white males on the board. So, there's a third and a third and a third just about every way you split it. And, as you mentioned, it's important to recognize that as you're talking about board composition and what's going to be important when someone is being selected or being identified as a board member, the existing board is going to be looking at their composition and decide what it is they feel like they want to add to the mix of the board members that they have. As equally as important as we feel like it is that there's diversity in in gender and diversity in culture and race, you also need to have diversity in thought. That is why it's important to have diversity and inclusion. It's not just cultural, race, and gender. It's also we're going to be a more holistic and more responsible community when you have decision makers who have the perspective of an array of ideals and experiences, and that brings to the decision-making table some of those factors that have traditionally not necessarily been a part of the decision-making equation. So while in many cases, you've got full C-suite administrators that are serving in board capacity. You might have somebody that has some specialty in terms of law. You might have somebody that has specialty in terms of finance. You might have somebody that, has built their career around, the elements of that industry. There are some other fundamentals about what contributes to successful industries and successful operations that I'm absolutely excited that Centerpoint represents, and appreciating how important it is that you have some perspective of the local community in which you operate, and being able to have a bridge to those who are in the community and decision influencers and decision makers, whether they are elected, selected, identified, or appointed. That's important in terms of a company's success and the environment in which they thrive, their headquarters thrives, and their employees thrive. And so I really appreciate that. That is a big part of what is reflected in the way that Centerpoint operates, and also a part of the board.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. I think it's great to see that kind of diversity in the boards, and what a great example that they're setting. I think that we may have some questions from some of our audience, and so I wanted to open up to some of those questions just to see if we can answer some of those in the time that we have left. Let's see. We have Kelly Weaver. She says, that's awesome. Have you always been this confident with others in the workplace, or is this something you've had to work on? I can almost answer that one, but you're pretty good. You're good. You're a great public speaker and comfortable with yourself. So
I wouldn't say always, but probably from a very early, time in life. I'm fortunate that when I was young, I used to get in trouble for talking too much, and now I get paid for it. So, it is one of those things where I feel like it's important for you to recognize where your skills are, what you're good at, and be in an area that allows you to flourish based upon where your natural talents are. And I've been very fortunate and blessed that among the things that I've been gifted with the ability to do, confidence has come with some of that. But it's not always, any performer will tell you they still get nervous. They still, they still have butterflies whenever it's time to go on stage. It's the same, whether you're going into the boardroom, whether you're going onto the stage, whether you're going into a meeting, whether you're, taking the stage to, give details about some very controversial, situation or project. There's still going to be that angst that happens. It's a natural part of being able to be a leader, is because that provides you with some empathy that you can try to use to connect with those that you are about to have some communication with. So it's not a bad thing when you aren't necessarily absolutely sure, but it's just kind of one of those things like lights, camera, action. Once it's on, it's on. You got to do what you got to do. So
And there's some
hopefully
practice,
that
there's some
answers.
places where people can go to practice that if that's something they're not comfortable with. There's definitely some opportunities for that. And I would suggest if you're not accustomed to public speaking or speaking up in meetings and things like that, try to get some exposure to that either through some volunteer work or something. There's lots of opportunities. I have a question here from Shamika Thompson is asking, are you seeing an increase in women and women of color in the transportation industry? Have you seen any changes in the years you've been in the industry?
There is some increase. I have not looked at the actual numbers recently because the transportation industry is so widespread. It is a world of its own. But what I can tell you is that it is still a very male-dominated environment.
Mm-hmm.
And even within TxDOT, we work really hard to try to improve and enhance the opportunities for diversity and inclusion. I'm proud to say that I have been a charter member of our employee resource group to develop a networking umbrella for women within TxDOT, and that actually spawned the development of our diversity, inclusion, and equity division because, we basically challenged our administration to say, if you're serious about this, it can't just be about, networking and us doing this on our own time. It needs to be a commitment on the part of the administration and on the part of the executives that this is an initiative that you're going to put money and resources to. And as a direct result of the work that we were doing for the development of our women's networking, that led to the creation of that organization under our human resources division. And we now have a director of diversity, inclusion, and equity that spawned from our, determination that, you absolutely must invest in this because not just because it's about being fair, but because it makes us better. It is it's a major contributor to our success, our sustainability, the decisions that we try to move forward on. It's always going to come back to how does this make the agency, the organization better, have better metrics, have better profit and loss. That's the reason to be an advocate for diversity as much as anything else.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And it does take an effort. I can speak from the stance of executive search and, whether there's a requirement for diversity and inclusion or not, it really depends on the recruiter that you get and the effort that people are willing to put behind it. And like you're saying, there has to be a concentrated effort. It seems maybe odd, but when you go through the process, you don't always get a diverse slate of candidates. And it doesn't mean they're not out there, but it means sometimes you have to make an extra effort, just like I mentioned about, your networking, getting out of your circle. Sometimes people in their hiring process and other things don't get out of their circle. And I think that there's an effort to be part of, organizations or resources or universities or whatever it is where you're finding those candidates and creating opportunities and bringing more diversity into the organization. And it's been proven over and over that it makes the company much, more profitable. It makes it for a better culture and everything to have that diversity. So I agree with you, and I really applaud TxDOT for doing that in any role you had in that. That's great.
I see a question here, Marie, that I want to try to to address. It's from Zena Nazer, I believe. I think it's a interesting question. She asked, how do you avoid tokenism on the board? And so my effort to answer that question is going to be, it's not how you get somewhere, it's what you do when you get there. It's what you know and what you can bring to the table. And so whether it's the boardroom, whether it's a conference room, whether it is, on any other stage, I think it's important that you are equipped so that when you have an opportunity to represent, and you represent the body of resources that are behind and within you, that you're able to demonstrate that there's value there. And so while for whatever reason you get to the table, it's what you do when you're at the table that's going to make the difference. So while somebody might very well think that you may be a token, show them why it's important to have a token, and why it's important that, representation from those that are less represented actually add value to the decisions that are being made. So that would be, my effort to try to say, I don't worry about stigmas like that, because I know what my value is, and I'm going to act on it.
That's right. And it's having that confidence. And I mean, none of us want to be elected to a board or put in an executive position because we're a woman or because we're a particular race or whatever. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be a token. But, hey, if the opportunity is there and you've had an opportunity to be on a board, you have an opportunity to make a difference. And so how you show up from that point on is what's really important and makes the biggest impact. And we talk about that and the program that we do is we're not teaching you how to be a great woman on a board. We're teaching you how to be a great board member when you get there. And that's what's really important. So that was a great question. I appreciate that, Zena. There was one other question in here I wanted to make sure we had a chance to address. Ashley Starr says, what has your experience been with board culture and cohesiveness? And I know this is your first board, so you may not have had a whole lot of chance to experience that yet, but any comments?
I'm going to defer to you, Marie. You've got some experience that you can speak to that question, and go ahead and give them some of what you got.
I like that punt back to me. So no problem. So, with board culture, when you think of a board, if you just really simplify it, a board is a group of people making decisions together, or they're influencing decisions. And when you're on a board, as I've mentioned, you're not there to give all the answers. You're there to ask the questions. You're there to influence and bring your knowledge and expertise. But with that said, a board is like any other group. A leadership team is a group. A management team 4 levels down is a group. If you're on a volunteer organization, that's a group. And so anytime that there's a group, there are group dynamics, and a culture gets formed. And a lot of times culture gets formed because of shared values and shared common ideas. What can happen, and the reason that diversity and inclusion is so important, is you need that diversity of thought. You need diversity of experiences to come to the table, because if you get a group, and I get this all the time about, well, what really is diversity? And speaking as a woman, I can address that. If you had 12 women on a board, I can assure you we would not all think the same way. We would not all agree. We wouldn't think the same way, and we wouldn't all show up with the same perspective. There's no such thing as a woman's perspective. But when you get into the culture of a board, what some of the things that might be important, and it's important to consider a board position, consider the board that's there before you take the position, as to the extent that you can, and understand who's on the board, and who's leading the board, and how long have they been there, and what kind of decisions has this board made in the past, and do they have a lot of people that really think a lot the same way, or did they challenge each other's thoughts? So that makes up the board culture, because like any group, you can get into a group think, or you can have a board that's open to new people, new faces, and new ideas. And so I think that from polling and speaking to many, many speakers who are very experienced board members, there's no one set culture. Each one of them can speak to the culture of the board or the boards that they're on. And if they serve on 4 or 5 boards, there are 4 or 5 different cultures.
And I absolutely agree with your answer to that question. And also I'd like to add that it's a group, a board is a group of people, but more importantly, it's a team of people, and a team of people are working towards the same goal and the same mission. And the people within the team have to be strategic about setting the tone and deciding, to get to that goal. And once you get on the board, I totally agree with what Raquel said too. Your job, there's work. There's work to get to the board, but then there's work once you're on a board, once you're appointed to a board. So there's work just like any other leadership position, or 9 times out of 10, you got there because of your leadership. You're going to continue to use those skills in your role as a board member. So one thing that I like to tell students and to tell anyone who aspires to be a leader, or new leaders, or anyone even taking a new leadership position, is that the first thing that you have to do whenever you take on a leadership position is stand out on the balcony. You have to stand out on the balcony in order to observe and to see the dynamics between the people. You don't come to the new team and all of a sudden, you just kind of overrun the conversation, and you just throw everything out on the table. You're not listening to other people. I mean, that's not a team. When you get on a team, sometimes you have to stand out on the balcony and observe and see what the relationships are, and see what the dynamics are. And but you're not going to withhold your thoughts and your opinions, because that's what you're there for. But you still have to do a certain degree of observation once you get in that position. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot in this conversation as well. And your journey has been very enlightening to me. And I like that, at the core of all of this, and what we saw in our last session when we had 2 CEOs, at the core of all of this is your very strong work ethic. And, just your thoughts about how you show up and what you can contribute. And, what got you there was a very strong work ethic. And not only that, though, dealing with people, figuring out how to deal with people, how to work with and through other people. And then, what got you so noticed even in the transportation industry, and you gave us an example of that, you were observant, and then you brought solutions to problems. And that's what they're looking for in leadership problems, is solutions to problems. So, what that leads us to is your journey is what you said, preparation meets opportunity. And it's what you know and who you know. It's not, both of them are equally as important. And I'm just happy to see that you were able to get on a board and bring, you're going to bring a different perspective. You're from another industry. And I do apologize by, kind of setting that tone about transportation and traffic. Traffic is just what affects us daily. So it's the first thing
it's a natural reflex.
Yeah, it's the first thing that's gonna come to our minds, because it's what we deal with daily. But yes, you're right. It's so much more. And I can, as you were saying it, I said, yeah, that's equivalent to, to someone calling me a teacher. I do so much more than teaching, research, teaching, service. And, it's like, no, professors are not teachers. So it reminded me of that. I said, I have to make sure that
just so that you know, I did not take any offense. I just wanted to offer that as an opportunity, since it's a window, to just kind of broaden people's perspective about it, because it is a natural reflex, because it is something that we deal with every day. And most of the time, particularly in Houston, you're having to deal with it from the perspective of it's inconvenience. And so, but to remind people that that inconvenience only exists because we have a thriving economy, because Houston is a place where people want to be and they are continuing to come here.
That's true.
How important it is for us to have solutions that can actually provide for reliable transportation options in the way that people want to travel where they need to go is absolutely critical. And so it's quite all right. It's a natural reflex, just like people don't really want to see construction, but they know once construction is over, ooh, it's going to be so much better.
Yeah.
Yes, and then, in our economy, you just made me think just so much more widely about transportation, because, the factors of production in any economy are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Well, I would argue that they should add transportation to that because none of those things just really come together without that, without transportation. But our time is just about out, and I am sure that I'm speaking for the rest of our audience when I say that your journey is inspiring and enlightening, and you've given us some really good tips about how to go for board positions. And one of the ones that I want to highlight is what you said, interest. You have to be interested. You have to have a passion for wanting to be there. You have to know what you bring to the table. So what is it that you can contribute to the overall direction of this company, and then have a game plan for getting there. So those are some of the most important things that I would like to see the audience take away. And what would be the most important thing, Marie, that you would like to see the audience take away from this discussion?
The thing that really stood out to me with Raquel is this idea of having a mentor. I mean, she's had a real mentor throughout her career who's helped her, and I'm sure she's had many, but she's had a really one that's really made an impact in her career. And I don't think enough people consider or sometimes even know what a mentor is or how they would work with a mentor, but that is life-changing and can be something, especially for students, to look around them and think about how they might find a mentor to help them and guide them along their way. I think that's really important.
Okay, thank you, Marie. And Raquel, if you would like to add any last words of advice or for our audience, what would it be?
My last words would be that leadership is key, and leadership is a muscle, and it is something that you have to work at. It requires skill development and enhancement. And while there are some aspects that may be naturally contributive, if that's your natural skill set, but it is certainly a muscle that can be exercised, that you can get better at, and that we all can always have room for improvement in finding ways in which to hone those skills and be better. And the intangible skills are those that will also be very much the differentiator when it comes down to all things being the same. If somebody's got, the same, skill or years of experience, or they've been in the same industry, those intangible skills that actually are a function of leadership, you're being able to be collaborative, you're being able to be collegial, ability and willingness to listen and engage with people are going to be those things that make the difference between, a leader and a great leader. Is, when you can bring people together to find solutions and work together to deliver on them. And so that would be what I would offer.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We are out of time. The time flew by.
I did.
So we're going for the sake of people, the people who showed up, their time. Thank you all for coming and listening. And with that being said, I'd like to say good night to you all.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.